I would honestly be a little bit controversial here and say that your brand is what it is and you should never change it. You can update it to meet the modern market or the modern consumer, but it is what it is. And the best brands in the world always come back. I always think about it like it's like your brand is like a character in a movie. A beloved character shouldn't do something that suddenly that character would never do. And what brands try and do, and this is just a natural function of the way that marketing gets overexcited sometimes by, new CMO or someone comes in and says, we're going to change everything. And that usually goes badly. So what you tend to find is the best brands and the best campaigns they kind of go archaeologically back and dig into their essence, their soul, And then they can update that, but they don't change it. So that's something that took me a long time to realize. But I think it's a really powerful kind of point of sanity, really. Otherwise you don't know who you are. The innovation hurricane is spinning faster and faster and faster, right? So I think our first kind of duty to ourselves is to find as many points of sanity as we possibly can. And I think the first point of sanity is like totally, authentically, and cathartically admitting who you are. And that's kind of step one. And then step two is about, I call it being cool. And what I mean by that is like being conscious of other life. So it's like, what are the opportunities that, a bunch of middle class, middle-aged people in a boardroom in a major city may not see because of the natural lack of consciousness that brings. So, one of the most sanity-inducing things anyone's ever said to me was at about 7:00 in the morning in the Peninsula Hotel in LA, and I'm sitting with Sean Parker, who was the guy who was the first president of Facebook, and we've all seen the movie. And he was my first investor, and we'd had a very big night out. And he said, I don't even try and keep up with everything that's happening. All I do is remember that in digital, the only word that matters is internet. And the internet is an interconnected set of networks. And those networks, they are constantly changing, but they're not demographic. They're passion and community and hobbies and things that people want to connect with each other with. And so, to any brand that's thinking like, what do we do once we admit who we are? The next step is to say, how do we become conscious of as many of those networks that are forming as possible? Because they are quite literally your market. And marketing is about seeing those markets and activating them, using that opportunity. And I think that we do quite a bad job of that in our industry. We describe things that are actually growing really fast as niche. So, I sat in every boardroom trying to explain to ABI, the biggest brewer in the world, that craft beer is going to be a thing. And they're all like, thanks, it seems a bit niche. And, 6 years later, they're buying Camden Hells Brewery for $6 billion, right? I sat in boardrooms with Nestle trying to explain to them that veganism is going to be a thing. And, it's so niche, and it's niche until it's not, and I think that's what we need to get a lot better at as an industry, is realizing that something can go from seemingly very small to very, very consequential fast. And I kind of jokingly always say that the niche, when I hear that word niche, I always call it the not in consciousness here excuse. And it basically is when a brand says, we don't know about it, so it can't be that big. And it's like, yeah, that's a mistake. So that would be the second thing. I would say, once you figure out who you are, then you've got to figure out what are these networks that you might be able to grow with and grow from. And that is easy to say and hard to do. Predicting the future is notoriously bad discipline to try and get into. But the one thing I would say is everything comes back to first principles, right? Like we're sitting in a room that was designed by somebody. I'm sitting on a chair that was designed by somebody. And there are certain rules like of physics that you'd have to obey to make that possible. And architects understand this, designers understand this. Marketeers constantly try and defy the physics of digital reality. And the physics of that, as I said a little bit ago, is that the internet is an interconnected set of networks. Those networks are passion and community based. So you can point to all the hip hop heads or I'm into drum and bass, right? I love coming here because I literally found about 5 groups with all my little drum and bass heads in Auckland when I arrived, right? But if someone said, can you find all the 35 to 39-year-old females? You can't. You can buy advertising on the internet, but not in the internet, right? So what we've done is we have an internet and that internet is culture. It's real people connecting about real things that they love. And then what we've done is we've built this advertising system on top of that, mostly because brands haven't got the capability to play in the internet. So what we say to them is, we know you're not good enough to do that, so we'll let you do what you used to do when you used to buy TV ads, and you can buy 35 to 39-year-old females in these 5 cities, So I think that the brands that will decimate everybody in the next 10 years are the ones that know how to play in culture, in the internet, not just on it. So they're not just going to be and a great way of thinking about that is, the content you go to watch on YouTube is what's in the internet. The advert you're forced to sit through before you get to that content is what's on the internet. And the smartest brands in the world they are figuring out that the ROI is to begin inside those networks before you start interrupting with the advertising on top of them. And the brands that can get that distinction they're gonna wipe the floor with the ones that don't. When you think about who's doing it really well, it's really sad because you always come back to the same. I could ask my mum and she would give me the same answers and so, everybody's going to say the same stuff. Nike, Apple, Airbnb. And what you end up realizing is that that's because they're literally playing from a different playbook. Their playbook is not, it's really interesting. I've had the strange pleasure of working with, lots of different types of brands. And in the early part of my career, mostly entertainment brands. So my clients were Usher and Lady Gaga and Madonna. And what's really interesting is that we used to think of brand building as entertainment brands build their brands that way. And then consumer brands, we build our brands this way. And honestly, it's so interesting to see how similar they are becoming. Like the best brands in the world operate the way that Taylor Swift or Usher or any of my other clients used to. They're starting to realize we have to do something that actually earns love before we start to communicate. And so it's almost like those brands that contribute and then communicate about the contribution, they win. And, I'm wearing Nikes right now, right? Now, it's really important to note, despite this is not a makeup thing, I am not African-American, right? But when Nike goes and gets Colin Kaepernick, once he's been expelled from the NFL, and makes him their lead athlete, and takes a stand about a particularly powerful issue, I don't have to be in that community to think, wow, that was a contribution. So this is the other big mistake, is that lots of brands think that if we identify a muse community, that's the only audience that would be interested in this contribution we're going to make to them. It's not true. Patagonia, I'm not an outdoorsy person, but I'm very aware that Patagonia make a contribution to the outdoor adventurer community. I'm not a yogi, but I wear Lululemon because I'm very aware that there's a real connection with yoga between, and it's almost like when I put a Lululemon top on, it's kind of like I'm dressing up as Yogi Mark that day, right? And this is what's so important to remember, is that what brands do is they think, because brands are writing, their playbook is about scale and mass and reach and frequency of advertising, right? So they're so obsessed about communicating at a certain frequency that they don't ever actually say, well, hang on a minute, what are we going to communicate about? And in the rush to communicate, they don't contribute anything. And so their communication is totally empty. And the brands that will, that kill it, is Patagonia's, the Nikes, the Ben & Jerry's, the Doves, all these brands, they've developed a communications platform that's mostly about contribution. And then you communicate about that. And those are the brands that outperform the market. They also have a disproportionate amount of loyalty and love from consumers. And yeah, it's just really interesting to see how actually, honestly, if you're a young person, you're thinking about starting a brand, start a brand in a category where there are no contributors, where everybody seeks to communicate and never to contribute, and you will wipe the floor.